So, at the time I'm speaking, the world's biggest election is ongoing, which of course is in India. This has been quite widely covered on a range of networks, particularly the BBC and NDTV, which is New Delhi Television, if you don't know. I just want to give a brief outline of my understanding of the election and some of its implications, and the front-runner, Narendra Modi. Now you may say, why do I as an outsider care? India is the world's biggest democracy. Far from a perfect democracy, but it is the world's biggest democracy. No democracy is perfect. But given it's the democracy with the biggest population, there is particular focus on India as a democratic experiment, particularly when you look at China and India are dominant in terms of, no other countries come close in terms of population, for example, to China and India. They're the only countries by a long stretch that have over 1 billion people. So one's a one-party system and one is a democracy. So India is sort of the template to weigh up against China, in some ways more than the United States, because partly it's in the same continent as China, and secondly it's a similar population, whereas the US is only a third of the population of China, so less than a third. So I think when we consider this election, sorry, I'm just sending a message to a friend. There's a few things I as an outsider observe. Firstly, there's some of the basic statistics. It's my understanding, and yes, I'm going by Wikipedia here, that this is the election for the 16th Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha is the lower house of parliament. There's 543 parliamentary constituencies in India. The Indian parliament is loosely modelled in the Westminster system, of course, because of the British colonial past in India that's left a legacy. So this is a massive election. They don't know the exact figures yet, but according to the Election Commission of India, the electoral population this year is 814 million, and a half million to be precise, and the figure may be even higher than that. That's a truly massive figure. I mean, when you think about that, it's over twice the entire population of the United States. Or to put it another way, imagine the entire European Union plus Russia. That's the sort of numbers we're talking about here. It's a vast, vast number of people, and 100 million people have been added to that register since 2009. Now the main candidates are Narendra Modi, who's representing the BJP, Rahul Gandhi, who's actually, I was going to say he's representing Congress, and he's representing Congress. It's my understanding he didn't register his papers until a bit later, and he hadn't been absolutely cemented as a Congress representative. The third candidate is Mr. Arvind Kejriwal. Personally, as an outsider, it's Kejriwal I have the best impression of, because he is an outsider and he seems to be a decent man. I don't know much about him, but he's tackling corruption. That's the platform he's taking. I think that's a huge issue in India. Certainly if we remember a few years ago when I forget the guy's name now, which is embarrassing because he was a household name at that time, but he was sort of a modern day Gandhi, and he led the campaign against corruption well. So has Mr. Kejriwal, and he founded the AA party, or at least he represents it, which is my understanding it's an anti-corruption party, and he's sort of the third candidate in this election. Now all the trends seem to show that Anna Hazare, by the way, Anna Hazare was the person who led that anti-corruption movement in India, sort of became known as a modern day Gandhi. Anna Hazare, of course, was a household name at that time, and Hazare is not a politician. Kejriwal's sort of like the political version, I guess, of Hazare. That's my understanding anyway. But in India, the BJP and Congress are sort of like the Democrats and the Republicans, so the two huge parties that dominate Indian politics. And my broad understanding, and I run a risk here of offending a lot of people, which is not my intention, my broad understanding is that Congress is more inclusive, but also tainted with corruption. And what happened in 2004, which was the second from last election, was that Sonia Gandhi was expected to win, but she surprisingly was reluctant to take power. And at that time, an unknown bureaucrat, Manmohan Singh, became Prime Minister. Now, Singh is an interesting character in the sense that he was my understanding is he's India's first Sikh Prime Minister. He's always distinguished by his blue turban. He's now 81 years old, so he's definitely one of the world's oldest leaders. He's got a very sort of passive style in the sense that he's soft-spoken, very clever individual. But in many ways, the Singh era can be seen as a lot of missed opportunities. I think that's the impression a lot of Indians have. I may be wrong about that, and I'm not personally giving any sort of disrespect to Mr. Singh. I'm not an Indian. I'm just going by what my impression is of Indian sentiments. So this is the end of the Singh era, and it looks like it's going to be the start of the Modi era. Now, I have to say, I can understand Indians who are very concerned about this. And there's wider concern, because India is a significant country in the world, a very significant country, a potential superpower, maybe not quite the same weight as China, but still a very significant country. The leader of that country is going to be a significant person. In India, the president is not as significant as the prime minister, although the president's head of state. So the prime minister in India is similar to the role in the United Kingdom and in other countries. It's a powerful position. So if the polls are right and Mr. Modi becomes Prime Minister, he's 63, which in Indian politics is relatively young. There's going to be a lot of questions about what direction India is going to take. Now, a lot of this rests on his legacy in Gujarat. He was State Minister for Gujarat, and his time there, my understanding is he was an efficient minister. He had a reputation for being a man of action, getting things done. However, the one dark cloud that always transcends over Modi is the fact that he was Chief Minister, that's my understanding, during the Gujarat riots in 2002, which were vicious, ugly riots, some of the worst sectarian violence post-independence India has seen. Well over 1,000 people were killed. About 3/4 of them were Muslims. There was a lot of Hindus killed as well. Very, very ugly sectarian violence. Of course, India has had a long history of Hindu-Muslim violence, and that's why, in my opinion, the best candidates are those who are not sectarian, because the last thing India needs is someone who's going to rabble-rouse and stir up sentiments against minorities. Now, I'm not saying Modi has done that in the election, but nevertheless his record is definitely, from an outside perspective, I get the impression Modi does rely on extreme Hindu nationalism, and that should be concerning for Muslims, Christians, Sikhs and moderate Hindus in India, because this is one of the world's most pluralistic societies. It's an absolute fabric of religions, and that's something India should be proud of. But Modi, basically, in other parts of the world, he would be basically a fascist. Now, I understand every country has a different context, and I'm not going to say Modi is a fascist. I do not know enough about the man. And I should say, his role in the Gujarat riots, he was cleared following a thorough investigation by the Supreme Court of India, although his critics would say that the evidence wasn't thorough enough, and there are notable incidents whereby he had a very questionable role, and even going so far as to say that he ordered police to commit massacres. Now, one thing I would say about India is, as the world's biggest democracy, freedom of expression should be a very important factor there, which means that I'm well aware I'm probably going to piss off a lot of people with this video, and that's not my intention. But India matters. India is the world's biggest democracy. Of course it matters what's going on there. So I just hope that Modi is not as dark a figure as his past may suggest. Like I say, if he's a good minister in Gujarat, maybe he'll be a good Prime Minister for India. And certainly Singh doesn't inspire a lot of morale in India right now, so I totally understand Indians wanting a new direction. So I can understand from that point of view the sentiments of Modi supporters. I just hope that his era will be inclusive. That's absolutely paramount. Already there's been signs that he's going to pander to Hindu theocracy. Now that's dangerous, because India, whilst a very religious country, should also be secular in the sense that it's pluralistic. So if you have one religion that dominates others, I know Hinduism is the biggest religion, but the danger is it's a threat to other religions if that then transcends into theocracy, and that's always a danger. The way I see it as an outsider, the main priorities for the next Parliament of India and the Prime Minister, and of course it's not China, the Prime Minister doesn't have complete power, it's not like a collective Politburo, it is a democracy, so the PM, whilst powerful, doesn't have absolute power. The main priorities should be, I remember one young guy, I think in Bangalore, saying India's main religion is GDP, GDP, GDP. That was quite an interesting statement. Obviously economic growth. India still contains a very, very, very high percentage of the world's poor. It's my understanding it's almost as high as Africa, perhaps even higher. Now that's obviously a contradiction. A country that has nuclear weapons and the Silicon Valley in Bangalore also has some of the most crippling poverty in the world. That's clearly a contradiction. And a lot of Indians will acknowledge that. I mean, I remember seeing a national presentation by some Indian students here, and they did acknowledge that. They say poverty is a big problem in this country. So tackling poverty is a major issue, and a very complex one. Obviously, economic development. Another major issue is corruption. Obviously, Anna Hazare heralded that campaign, but it's not just about Anna Hazare. A lot of Indians are deeply concerned about that. You cannot have a functioning democracy with that level of corruption, so clearly it's a challenge for India, and it will take a lot of hard work and a lot of pragmatism to deal with that. Pollution obviously is a factor. I don't think it's as major as some of the other problems, but it is a big problem. Some Indian cities are, we often talk about polluted Chinese cities. Some Indian cities are just as bad. In fact, some in recent months and years they've actually had a higher rate of air pollution than some Chinese cities. That's a major issue. Religious harmony is going to be a major challenge, especially in India, a country that has a long history, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but it does have a long history of religious violence. That's just a fact. Press freedom is very important. India, despite being a democracy, has actually got high rates of journalists who have been killed in recent years, and the statistics show it. Now, I don't know where that comes from. I don't know whether it's police brutality or corrupt politicians. I don't know where it comes from, but it's far too high. Human rights is an issue in India, and that's disgraceful for a democracy. It is an issue. There's far too many instances of police brutality. That's something that needs to be tackled, and that, like I would say in any situation, nationalism cannot cloud that issue. I'm certainly not saying India is the worst, but to be the world's biggest democracy, it has far too many problems. That also relates to religion, because you have situations like the caste system in Hinduism, which still exists. As much as it is denied, it still exists. And the situation may have improved, but there is undoubtedly still problems connected with that, especially in the Dalit community. And I'm not saying it's a simple problem. None of these problems are simple. but it is a challenge. I see that as from an outside perspective. Now, I don't sort of sit here shivering, think, oh, are Indians going to be furious with me? Because I know many Indians will agree with a lot of the points I'm making. Indians, my impression is, many Indians are clever and open-minded people, so I would appeal to them. I'm sure you would reflect on the points I'm making and agree with them. So that's all I need to say, really. Finally, as an outsider, I wish India the best for the coming years. I really hope Mr. Modi, if he is indeed the winner, will be a pragmatic and inclusive leader. Yes, he has a dark past, but let's hope that is not going to define the man, because it does look likely that he will be India's next Prime Minister. It all remains to be seen what happens in the next 24 hours when the results are counted. So I really hope India can have a bright future in the coming years. So best wishes, India.